Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Nicole Mira. I am a New Jersey girl. I grew up in Washington Township, New Jersey, in Gloucester County. I'm now a professor at Rutgers University, where I prepare future teachers. And I'm also a member of the National Writing Project Network. And that is how I became interested in the film American Creed. And I feel really lucky to be here with these three gentlemen today to reflect on the themes that have been raised by the film and hopefully start a conversation that will continue out into the community at large. So I just wanted to go around first and just let our guests introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Claude?
Thank you, and welcome everyone. My name is Claude Taylor. I'm a lecturer in communication at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey. I also serve as the Director for Academic Transition and Inclusion, and in that role at Monmouth, I help to support students who are first in their families to go to college. So I work very closely with first-generation college students. I've had a long relationship with the Toms River Ocean County Library System, hosting community events as well, and engaging in dialogues around race and ethnicity and difference. And so that's what drew me to this American Creed panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to a dialogue about the American Creed and some of the issues that we can discuss this evening.
Thank you so much. Gregory, welcome.
Hi, my name is Gregory. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this. I'm really excited about this. It is a joy to be here. I run a page called Portraits of the Jersey Shore, where I simply go out with a microphone and a camera, and I go up to strangers I find along the coastal towns of New Jersey, and I ask to interview them, and I ask them personal questions about themselves. What was one of the most difficult times of their life? What was one of the happiest times of their life? What are they most proud of in their life? And just through those three questions, I have heard countless stories of tragic loss, of great victories, of just heartache, just of beauty. And what my mission is to unearth the inherent dignity of every single person that I meet. And that's my mission. I've been doing that for 5.5 years now with Portraits of the Jersey Shore.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Joel, welcome.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for having me. My name is Joel Markell. Originally a New Yorker, I've lived with my wife, Stephanie, in Monmouth County for 30 years. As a living, I am the owner of Preferred Home Healthcare and Nursing Services. And I also host a radio show on WOBM AM called Preferred Company. Would love for you to listen in, join, and truly appreciate being here this evening.
Thank you, Joel. And I don't know if I'm allowed to admit it, but I am currently a New Yorker, even though Jersey always in my heart. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. Excited to have
My old haunt.
I'm really excited to talk about this film with all of you. And I also was reflecting as I was getting ready to jump on here that this film was released in February, like right around now in 2018. So 3 years ago. And it was just striking to me as I was rewatching the film, just how it feels like, you know, centuries have passed since even 2018 in terms of where our country is, these issues that have just become even more magnified, but also how the message of the film still resonates. So I just wanted to start off and kind of anyone can get us started just about some first impressions or the messages or stories that you really are sticking with you after viewing the film. Just kind of what's stuck out to you the most so far.
I could start. I really enjoyed the film. I was so surprised to have Condoleezza Rice be one of the stars of the show. I've been such a fan of hers for so many years, and I just think that she brought something very special to the film, being both a woman of color, a Republican. I've actually seen her in person, and she's remarkable. So when she showed up at the film or on the film, I was extremely touched by it. I was smitten by the film because of her. So it was a great start.
Thanks for sharing. And anyone can feel free to jump in.
Sure. I mean, I would add screening the film and giving myself several times to see it. So I watched it a couple times in a row. The story, first of all, the storytelling was really engaging. And so we know this is the thing about stories and storytelling. We know that framing some of these bigger, broader issues in the voice of ordinary Americans, everyday Americans, is deeply engaging. And then the story of Junot Diaz was really what sort of caught my eye. I've been following his literary career for a bit, and the tensions that he points to in that segment about his growing up in central New Jersey. They called it central New Jersey in the film. I think it was that sort of West New York area, Essex County.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciated the tensions that he drew out about the language of the American creed, right? The words of a creed that speaks to our sense of togetherness and bonding around this American project, but then also the forces of and the factors of marginalization, right? So how the contours of us and them get drawn and trying to work our ways through that. So I mean, I grew up in Asbury Park, so I'm a Monmouth County person, although now I currently live in Middlesex County, still New Jersey, and right in that central part of the state. So I do, for those who doubt there's a central New Jersey, I can confirm that central Jersey is a thing. But I do think the stories in the piece, so my initial impressions were that those stories are very much New Jersey stories, right? As we move up and down the state and look at the dynamics and the contours of cities and towns in all the counties of New Jersey, you're hearing and seeing those voices in the voices of the film as well.
I really resonated with this movie because it is about our story. It is about our story as Americans, but it is also about our stories of where we come from. It is about our stories about where we want to go. It is our story about where we are. And significantly, it's also about our story individually. Because if America is anything, it is about individuals that have their own unique story that are then asked to come together to present a bigger story. And for out the history of America, we've had challenges to that, but we seem to have always overcome those challenges to continue a distinct American identity. And right now, that identity is at a crisis again. It is being challenged because of not because of story, but because of ideologies. And currently, ideologies has replaced story as far as what the identity of America is.
And Gregory, could you tell us a little bit more about how you see the difference between ideology and story?
Yeah, ideology is basically a flag in a tribe and saying, this is what I belong to. Everyone who believes what I believe can join this tribe. If you do not, then you are now the enemy. But as far as this is where it comes back to what I do, I am convinced, profoundly convinced, that if we can get back to story again and see each other not as identifying with a tribe, but as all of us as human beings who have stories that we can actually identify with because we're all human. What I always like to say is that we have far more in common as humans than we realize if we can just listen to each other again. But right now, all we're doing is shouting at each other. No one's sitting down to listen anymore. And that's what I think we need to get back to. And that's what I loved about this movie. You had in that classroom, right? You had different generations. You had college kids and boomers, right? You had people of different colors and races. You have people who have been growing up in generations of Americans, and then people who are first generation Americans, all coming together. And what were they doing? They were listening. They were asking questions, and they were safe to be able to respond, and they were all listening to each other. And that, to me, it's the listening and resonating with our stories that I believe personally is uniquely American.
And I should mention also that my first career before joining up at Rutgers as a professor of teacher education was as a high school English teacher myself. So definitely the parts of the film that revolved around schools and classrooms were very important to me. And as an English teacher, I've always believed in the power of stories as the idea of, windows and mirrors and sliding doors into the experiences of others. So I appreciate how all three of you were talking about storytelling. Sometimes who is telling the story, like how Joel mentioned, hearing Condoleezza Rice, hearing the way that she, that conversation in the beginning where her and David kind of like flip some assumptions that might be made about them in terms of, her grandfather having gone to college, whereas that might not have been an assumption that people would make about her. I'm a first generation college student myself, and storytelling is a way to get past those kind of like you're saying, these divides, to get to the real humanity of it. So I like how we're all getting into storytelling immediately. And I wanted to kind of build on that. You've already started talking about this idea of what binds us as Americans, being this creed that comes up through the whole film. And I would like to expand a little bit more on, in this moment today, as we feel like we're being pulled apart so much, what does still bind us? And then how do you see forces kind of threatening that and starting to pull us apart?
Message that I think I heard come through in the film very powerfully was this sense of wanting to live a life of meaning. And boy, do we see examples of that in so many of the segments of the film. My dad served in Vietnam as well, so when the war veterans, the veteran segment was pretty powerful to consider how the story there is about the teamwork and camaraderie of serving together for something bigger than yourselves, right? But back to the beginning of the film, when Joe Madden was talking about Hazleton, PA, and how, his theory is that if you put kids on a team, like they're going to figure it out, right? They're going to get along. And the story there is that a common enterprise, as Condoleezza Rice said, so the common enterprise of teamwork, and then common service of military in service, like the common story there. In every segment of this film, you hear people express their desire to live a life of meaning. And that, I think, if we can retain our ability to listen to and hear those parts of people's stories and really kind of focus in on that, then I think we can build back to whatever it is that I think we are aspiring to for in this democracy and in this common common enterprise of our American democracy, is by listening to the ways we all just want to live a life of meaning.
Yeah.
Joel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm so fascinated with the fact that this was produced in 2018, in that it probably was thought of, okay, this is a problem, and here it is. The problems have only enlarged since then. They've only gotten bigger since then. The voices that I heard in the movie have to be much louder now. That whatever problems were being presented are now magnified. I think that goes for everybody who has seen the film. Everyone who is alive in the United States today has to recognize that whatever it was that we had going on in 2018 is just larger today.
Mm-hmm.
I have a theory in life that if you want to get to the truth, you go to children, because I feel like they don't hold back. And children and elderly people typically are the best sources of the truth. And I especially loved listening to children and their thoughts as to what it means to be an American, how they could become more Americanized. There were just so many beautiful words out of the mouths of babes as I listened to the film. That children will always do it to me. And Joe Madden, as just mentioned, he makes reference to that. Start with children. Parents will follow their children's needs. Loving parents will always follow their children's needs. So I particularly, I was touched by the school, Joe Madden's story. Any time there were children, I felt especially enriched.
Mhm. I've always believed that our children are the most kind of like radical because they have visions of the world and of the future that um, are kind of like like a utopian, and it's only as we get older and we start to let the troubles of the world start to kind of take us over that we forget what little children can teach us, and we start to pull apart. But Gregory, what do you think starts to do that pulling apart? If we know that it seems so simple, that everyone just wants what's best for their families, everyone wants to make a meaningful life.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem that complicated, doesn't seem that it should be this hard, but we know that it is. And so the pulling apart, element of this, why is this happening, do you think?
Yeah. So I think going back to children, uh, you look at the children that were in Oklahoma. There were like a case study. There was, and how many of them were growing up? Some of them without even their parents there, incarcerated, drug addicted. Their stories are already now being written, and as they get older, children right now are pure and they're fresh. But as they get older, they start realizing that life is hard, and cynicism can set in, especially if you've gone through a lot. And now what happens is they're looking for answers. They're looking what can help me through this. But I think that if anybody watched The Social Dilemma, there is a lot of social media voices now that are coming at them, and it's pulling them now into these tribes, because it's like, okay, um I, my father ran out of my mother, and I have no father now. Well, there's a group over here. It's just like, hey, we're gonna fill in that need for you. We're gonna have those answers. We're gonna supply you with a channel for all that angst that you have, and that group may be a very good group, and it could be very productive, or that group could be a conspiracy group. It could be something that has ill intent for people that are vulnerable. And the problem is that it's very hard to be able to decide which is which when you're in the middle of it, and there are no parameters. The social media and the internet is a wild west. There's nothing out there to be able to help people to discern what is real and what's, I mean, you know um the attention, the vast majority of attention that the youth are getting are through teachers, which I think is a great thing. You are an educator, but
Mhm.
when they're not getting it from the teachers or from the homes, they're getting it from social media, and that's the loudest voice in our head right now, and it's a very dangerous place to be. So I
Mhm.
think that's where the fabric starts being falling apart.
I know the film starts to mention misinformation, but it feels like it's been, magnified so much more in the past
Mhm,
3 years.
mhm.
And Claude, I wanted to pass it over if you also were thinking about social media or other forces that you feel are starting to kind of pull us
Yeah.
from that meaning.
So to me, one of the most meaningful and moving segments was the towards the end where Eric Liu was talking about civics and his project, um, the Civic University project. And to me, part of what is pulling us apart and can be a source of disjuncture is the loss of inclusive civic rituals. So I do think it's important to emphasize inclusion. Part of what we're seeing amplified now, right now, today, contemporarily, is the 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 yearning for an inclusive history that helps to tell a kind of full story of the American experiment, right? And so the civic rituals, inclusive civic rituals that opens up space for us to hear about the good, bad, and the ugly of the sort of evolution of this American experience, I think is critical. But as you heard emphasized in the film, what makes this work, though, is a common understanding that we're in it together. And I fear that and this comes up in 2018 in the film, with the disillusion of some of the trust in institutions, the church and schools and the government, and like as we've been saying this evening, it's escalated and sort of accelerated from there now. Um, I think our most important task is to find a way to reconnect with each other with rituals of civic connection, right? How do we reinforce that we're in it together? Because we're saying it, and I think in lots of different quarters around the country, we are hearing people say, we're in this together, but we don't have a strong way to operationalize that right now, right? How do we put it into action? We need more of that. And so here are a couple of things I saw in the film that I thought spoke to that, right? Team sports, right? And so making sure that we create opportunities for not just affluent kids and families to have access to sports and the magic of sports and the way that sports can change lives, but to make sure that everyone has an opportunity who wants to participate in sports to do that. Other kinds of volunteer and civic organizations. I mean, those are ways. My parents got me volunteering at the age of 7. I think it was either 6 or 7 that I learned the connectedness of serving others, right? It's not just about you. Your life on the planet isn't just about you. And I think you heard Condoleezza Rice say that and make reference to that too, that this isn't just about you as an individual, but there is a collective responsibility. And so how do we get there? So as we've been hearing today, I do agree and contend that we have to be truthful with each other about everything that has brought us to where we are today, but then recommit to building an inclusive future together. And I think we can return to what we imagine and aspire to as this great American project.
Thank you. And Joel, I was thinking as Claude was talking about, and I think Junot Diaz brought this up, this idea that patriotism doesn't have to just mean acting as if everything has always been rosy, right?
Mhm.
This idea of like, let's get back to some kind of pre-time when we were all happy together, which we know doesn't actually exist. Joe Madden talked about his own grandparents going through the same kinds of discrimination that now was being inflicted upon the next generation. So this idea that does patriotism always have to be happy, or can we be patriotic by delving into the stuff that's hard and to the failures of our history? Do you see that as another way to maybe get past what's pulling us apart, or what other issues do you see with that?
So I remember when I was in grade school in Brooklyn, New York, and probably the 3rd or 4th grade, I heard the term melting pot, that America was a melting pot. And I've heard that ever since. It hasn't changed. It was like that when I was in grade school. It's like that today, perhaps even more so. And in terms of the film, there was one thing that kept on hitting me, and that was, I think when I was younger, I saw America as a destination. We see people coming in from Ellis Island, uh, immigrants coming in from all other nations, and this was the place that we wanted to get to, America. I'll speak about my own family afterwards, but in general, America being the destination, everybody wanted to get to America. And I started to think, and the film actually helped me crystallize this, America is now a journey. It's really not a destination. It's about a spirit of getting to a place that you want to be in, a place that you want to reach, whether it be socially, economically, anything that you hope to get is really part of your journey. I don't see America as presented in this film as a destination where somebody's going to get off a boat and here I am, I'm in America. It's now, as you're on the boat, the vessel is what you call America. And I really never saw America that way, that we're all traveling to a place that we want to feel safe, we want to feel secure, we want the same for our children, our neighbors. And I don't think I could have ever extracted these words had it not been for this film.
Oh, thank you. I love that.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor of America as a boat. I really appreciate that, the travel metaphor. And Gregory, I'm thinking about, because I know you have a lot of experience on social media with your project. And I know that I do believe that social media is a tool, right? It can be used in some ways for great democracy in terms of getting more voices out there.
Mhm.
But then we also see often the dark side that it turns to. So I'm curious about this idea of like why it's so difficult for us to talk across differences right now, and why there's this mindset of scarcity in terms of like, if I can get somewhere, everyone else like can't have a piece of the pie, or it might take away from me. And when we have the chance to talk on social media, it often turns into yelling at each other, or saying really hurtful things that we might not say in person. I'm just wondering about like why you think the difficulty persists, especially on these social media spaces.
Great question. There's several different factors. I'll really just name two. Um, and I think, well, I know that the one thing is the not anonymity. People do not have to face the person that they're talking to. It's just, hey, I'm behind my keyboard. They can't have access to me. I'm just going to say whatever comes to my mind. There has been a breakdown of compassion and empathy because of the anonymity of this um, social media phenomenon, which still is, I mean, it's so young. It's only been here for maybe 13 years. I mean, when did people start going on Facebook and all that? It was like around 2008, 2009. I mean, it's so young still, and we haven't actually been able to adapt yet. We're still like trying to catch up to what this actually means. And the other one is, I'm going to keep coming back to this, is the ideologies. You're either for us or you are against us. There's nothing in the middle, and it is out of that scarcity. We have to be able to mobilize our forces to get what we think is right for ourselves, and anything that disagrees with us or thinks differently than us is now opposed to us, so they are now our enemy. I have taken great pains to firmly establish a community on my page of empathy and respect and kindness. People of all walks of life will share vulnerable stories. I've had men, construction workers, break down and cry in their arms as they're telling me about their childhood abuse. And I'm sharing these really raw emotional stories, and the people really resonate, and they comment out of care, they comment out of compassion and empathy. And I'm so proud of the community that I've been able to develop, and it shows that this is possible. But it's because I really do have a vision for what is possible, and I do regulate. If someone is being nasty and if they persist, they are gone. I will remove them. And I think that we need to have a certain amount of we need to have rails to guide it. We have to. If we just let anything go, then anything will go. And people have to be able to catch the vision. And there has been several times throughout each year for the last 5 years, I will just say, this is what we're about. This is why this exists, because everyone has inherent dignity and worth, and we are going to honor that. That's what this page says. If you're about that, please be a part of this community. You're welcome here. If you're not, then we're going to help you to find somewhere else to go. But the fact of the matter is, though, is that because people are in these camps, and with the anonymity, it's a free-for-all. And one other thing I want to say too is kind of Condoleezza Rice was saying how it doesn't matter where you're going, it doesn't matter where you've been, it's where you're going. I think I have a little bit of a problem with that because there's a lot of people that are in between that. There are a lot of people who I've met that are homeless or drug addicts or widows or living in, below wages of where they can be able to afford a housing, and they don't have a goal where they are going. They don't have anything to look back on where they've been. They are existing in a perpetual angst and not knowing where they belong. And I think that the American dream needs to be able to incorporate those people into that vision as well. And that's where I think it comes down to. What do we do with those marginalized fringe people that don't have a voice? How do we rise up and be able to give them a voice? And I think that's where a lot of the battle lines are drawn, because we have people who are just like, we need to be able to champion them and defend them. And then you have other people who are like, well, they need to be able to just do it for themselves. And that's where the battle lines are honestly met right there usually.
Mhm. And Claude, I wanted to pass this back over to you to pick up on this idea of, I know it came up in the film as well, that we can learn the most about America, like from what Gregory's saying, from those who are on the margins, who aren't experiencing maybe that traditional narrative of the American dream. And this idea that all of us have, pain that maybe others don't know of, right? Like, the people we pass in the grocery store, we don't know their pain, we don't know their stories. And we can get lost in our own struggle because there's a lot to struggle about nowadays. What have you found also about, like, why we can't seem to maybe sometimes start the conversation across those differences, and then how we can, like you were saying, team sports, other ways we could start making that, cross that divide?
No, I mean, I think my sense is that if we can sort of return to a culture of interpersonal civility, right? And by that, I mean, fighting these forces of polarization requires that we all, sort of roll up our sleeves and make a concerted effort to connect with each other. So I do think it's important to talk about and to consider economic polarization. So the sense is, because you mentioned earlier about this sense of people experiencing a sense of scarcity. And look, the reality is, with a growing income and wealth gap between people, and we sort of typically turn back to the heyday of the middle class, quote unquote middle class, and that mid 20th century lifestyle, which very much was a consumer lifestyle. So I mean, I do think we need to attend to the upward and downward pressure on folks related to the economy and well-being, and for our psychology colleagues and friends who think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, with more people really struggling to meet basic needs, it makes it more difficult for us to do the more advanced connecting that we would want to do, like you making space for others in our lives and being empathetic, as Gregory mentioned, and his project just sounds really fabulous, to give people a platform to be heard and to honor those stories. I mean, I think citizenship is about your obligations. And I think part of our obligations as citizens of this project is to look outwards and turn to others. And so part of what I would, again, from the film, a theme that really impressed me and it spoke to me was that tension between individualism and collectivism. I mean, I do think, and today we're in the midst of like really vivid conversations and debates and arguments about that. How much of my success, quote unquote success, is just me pulling myself up by my bootstraps, and my success is tied to how hard I work, versus the community around me and the connectedness of others and our investment in others. And so Gregory brought up the Condoleezza Rice quote from the film about not where you've been, where you're going. And I too have some reservations about a wholesale kind of embracing of that concept, because there are contextual challenges that we have to endure and to consider. And so then my last sort of reflection here is about the spaces where where were the spaces, where have traditionally been the spaces where we could connect with each other across class and race and ethnicities. One of them to me that I think is in decline, but we really do need to reclaim, are those spaces of public education. So now we come back to the education context. I went to Catholic school for 12 years and had a K through 12 experience in quote unquote private school. But then I went to a public university in Pennsylvania. So I went to Westchester University of Pennsylvania, and that public school setting, that context, really like transformed my life in some really important ways because of two things. There was a real sense that working class and middle class folks were in this enterprise of education together, and we had spaces to talk and listen, right? You got to meet people from different backgrounds, and we just have fewer of those places, those spaces today. And I do think if we're going to recover this American project, we need to reinvest in those kinds of spaces.
Mhm. And I teach my students about residential segregation, school segregation.
Mhm.
It's easier and easier, and then media segregation on top of that. It's easier and easier to retreat into like-minded communities where we don't have to really step outside or know that there are communities outside of ourselves. Uh,
Right.
you're speaking to how important it is to do that in our schools and in our lives. I'm also thinking about what I tell my students about the fact that democracy is not neutral, right? Democracy has certain values of fairness and equality and justice. And there are things that I cannot let happen in my classroom as a teacher, right? I cannot let any of my students be made to feel unsafe, be discriminated against. So I'm really interested in this tension between, like, yes, we are all one human family, but being colorblind is not the answer, or not thinking about our differences as if they don't exist is not the answer, but instead
Mhm.
honoring them and insisting upon humanization, right?
Right.
Well, I'm thinking about, like, we can't ignore the fact that we can disagree about policy, but unfortunately we have seen that there's still forces of racism, homophobia, anti-Semitism. Like, we're seeing them in the news each day. These things are not gone, and social media is exacerbating them, but they're in there and they're popping up. So what are the ways that you feel like we need to kind of get these out into the open, and how do we have conversations about them that can be productive instead of getting defensive?
My feeling is that, as I mentioned earlier, the problems that are presented in the film are what I think are much worse today. And I take a look and ask myself, well, what's happened? Where is it that we've gone even more wrong? And obviously, I don't have the answer to the whole thing. If I did, I promise you I would share it.
Oh, please.
But yeah, but I know where my anger lies. My anger lies with the media. I feel like when I was growing up as an American kid, I was able to listen to and read the truth. I just trusted what I was reading. I don't feel, I don't think that young people today or adults today are getting unbiased reports. Everything seems to be selling people something else. And it's very disturbing to me that we have to live in a world where people just can't report. They can't tell us what it is that's gone on. It needs to have a side to it.
Mhm.
That being said, I don't think you can raise healthy children if you're already putting bias into their heads. We grow up with bias. Every single person that's alive has certain biases that were created perhaps the moment they were born, and that's just human. but I think a healthy home knows how to soften it, knows how to extinguish hate. And what I'm finding with my own life right now is that I don't want to be watching television. I'm very turned off to what's being thrust at me. I truly want facts and not what you want to say. And I don't think America was like that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It truly is damaging to young minds who need to hear what it is and not what somebody else wants them to be. So it gave the media a lot of thought during the film in terms of where is there a place that we can create a healthier America. I would start with the media.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It made me think of there's a project I'm working on right now, and it kind of made me think of Gregory's The Portraits of the Jersey Shore as well. We're getting young people from different communities all across the United States to be part of something called the Digital Democratic Dialogue Project. So I've got young people from Anchorage, Alaska, all the way to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, using the internet to talk to each other about what their American experience is in these different places around the country, and to talk about the issues that matter to them. But getting to this idea of the media, instead of doing what we usually do in schools, which is, give your claim and, show your evidence and let's have a debate, we're saying, let's put that evidence aside for a moment and tell me your story. And so this is why it reminded me of Gregory and the Portraits of the Jersey Shore, is that you can't get into an argument about facts when you're just listening to someone's truth, right? We just need to step back and listen to that truth. And I'm wondering about kind of, Gregory, I found it's also hard sometimes because we have to let our guard down a little bit to do that. And I'm wondering if when you started this project, it was hard to for folks that have been stuck in their bubbles maybe for a long time, what does it take to start letting ourselves be vulnerable with each other and leaning into this discomfort in these conversations?
This is something that's so important for me, and I'm really glad you brought this up. It's my own personal story is one of overcoming great challenges, and I wear my heart on my sleeve when I talk to these people. I come from childhood abuse myself, and I, in my 20s, was an alcoholic, was homeless, and was ultimately, and I was finally shot in the head, laying in the street, bleeding to death in New Brunswick by a police officer. He was chasing someone else. He shot me by accident in the middle of the night, as an innocent bystander, and I was laying there, and I should be dead right now. But I found faith in Jesus. I met an amazing woman, found really new good friends, and I was, with the help of others who believed in me, was able to turn my life around. So when I go up to someone and say to them, what has been one of the most difficult times of your life, I'm speaking out of a place that I really truly mean when I ask. And people have said to me that when I talk to them, it's like a therapy session, because I'm able to come out of my own experience and then share with them their experience, and now we're in this together. And I think that when we are able to say, I am with you because of my own experience, now we're together. Now our truths are one truth. We are human beings. We have suffered. We have tasted defeat. We have tasted victory. We are in this together. And if we could all come to this with the humility of saying, I too have been through difficult times in life. Let me hear about yours. Let me share mine. Now we have something called compassion and empathy. And for me, just from my own framework, that's what I have championed for 5.5 years. And it works. And it works. I'm telling you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure folks in the audience that are watching this when it airs are going to be ready to add to this. So I want to just kind of wrap up with some reflections on this idea of what brings us hope, because I know that I've had a hard time. We're also in the midst of a pandemic on top of everything else. So I feel like it's been a really rough, going on a year now of all of us experiencing fear and isolation illness on top of political division that's gone on. And I know I've had a roller coaster of emotions, and there's days that I feel angry, and there's days that I feel scared, and then there's days that I have hope. And so I'm wondering, and Claude, I'll start with you about it, at the end of the day, knowing that, it's not as easy as just saying, like, listen to your neighbor and then we're going to be good. We know that this is rough. There's a long road to go.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about the future of dialogue in this country and how we're going to get past some of the problems that we're having, what kind of keeps you going when you're having the rough days?
I have been re-energized by watching how committed people are to social justice. I mean, that is, we want America to work. We want this place to be all it can be for everyone. And so, projects like the New York Times 1619 project, projects like the Indigenous peoples stands against all kinds of treaty violations and the history of oppression speak to me. So this summer was really encouraging, although, and I agree with you, scary, anxiety provoking, and a lot to be worried about. I see an enormous amount of hope in the fact that people really are ready to roll up their sleeves and keep working at this American experiment. And as Gregory said, it's going to be tough, right? It is hard. He mentioned it. He said, look, it's you gotta deal with some uncomfortable stuff, right? And and we have to continue to do that. But at the heart of this American experiment is this idea of dignity and freedom and the pursuit of happiness, right? And if we can, and so, right, it's not as easy just talking to your neighbor, but extending a sense of dignity and empathy and concern to others around you, and like really wanting to hear all of the story, not just the parts that are glamorous and self-serving. That gives me hope. The fact that people are willing to learn and willing to work at it, and I do think that people are committed to making this country the country we want it to be.
Thank you. Joel, what brings you hope?
I think my personal story actually is one that I'd like to share here, in that I am the child of a Holocaust survivor. My mother, having been left totally alone at the age of 16, came to America all by herself. I'm not sure that she had a dress on, just she got here, and that America was a destination then. And I grew up in a home where hate was real. You didn't pretend that it wasn't there. It wasn't as if, that's somebody else. Hate was real. It was experienced. Learn. I think that was my mother's lesson to us. Learn from what I experienced and make your life a better one. You don't have to hate because you're hated. Learn to live a freer life. This is the United States. This is America. You have the opportunity not to hate. And I believe that my mother's voice, over and over and over, even today, at 93, she's still teaching us the same lesson. We have such a great opportunity, having been born in the United States, to take America and just create a life that is without hate, where you have the ability to work if you want to grasp it. I do believe that if we take human suffering and understand that that's not the end, that there is so much beyond human suffering, we could have the America that we want. As I said earlier, I believe America is a journey and not a destination. So I do have hope.
Thank you. And I love how, we all just met right shortly before this taping, and I love that we're all engaging in this vulnerability right now and sharing of ourselves. And this has been like so wonderful to even hear. And Gregory, I wanted you to have last word about the things you're thinking about that bring you hope for dialogue in this country.
Yeah, because of this, because there are conversations being had. People are asking these questions now. What have we missed? What can we be doing differently? We're not sitting here yelling at each other, telling each other how we need to change. We are asking each other, how can we do this together? And I think that there's going to be a groundswell. I believe there's going to be a wave of this where more and more people are going to say the yelling's not working. Can we sit down and ask each other instead, how can we do this together? Because I think, honestly, I think everyone's sick and tired of the yelling. Now, there are times to stand up and say this is wrong. But once that's been pointed out, then we need to sit back down and say, okay, now how do we work this out? And this gives me hope. So thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate this.
I think this is just the beginning of a conversation, and I'm thinking a lot about my source of hope is also like what we started with in the beginning is the children. You know, any educator, you know, we can't do our jobs without having hope, right? If you work with young people, that's the definition of hope of the next generation. And I know that the young people I work with, they are fiery and they are ready to go, and they are going to change the world. And I believe that this film could be a great conversation piece with them as well. There's resources online from PBS and from the National Writing Project about showing this film to young people and having these conversations. And also I love this idea that we kept coming back to empathy and compassion and hope, because that's how we get rid of that scarcity mindset, because those are the things that the more you give them, the more that it appears, right? Like we don't run out of it. So I feel like this film has brought all of us here into conversation, and hopefully the entire Jersey community. So I just want to thank all of you again for being willing to talk through it, and I'm so excited to see what happens next. Thank you all.
Thank you.
for having
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Claude and Joel. It was an honor to be on this with you too.
The feeling is mutual. It's really great to be in dialogue with you guys.
Thank you all for sharing. It was a beautiful experience for me. Nicole, thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you.
And audience,
Yeah.
now is your turn. Now is your turn to speak, but also to listen. And I do think part of what's so magical about community conversations is that we're all brought together to not just say what's on our mind, because that is important, but also to listen. And we wish you a lot of really good luck and a good experience continuing this conversation beyond this panel.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
just
and the
remember,
library. It wouldn't be happening without the library, right?
Yes.
And library was in the film as well. Like, democracy is the public library. Like, how amazing that they're the ones sparking this. So thank you to the
Indeed.
Ocean Library.
Yes. Cheers to the library. Yep. Public spaces, the public space of a public library is incredibly important.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.